So I will be conducting mainly this workshop, but together with Stephen Richmond here, because we are working on this project together, and this is really we are telling you where we are at this moment. It's a work in progress, and we'd like to share ideas with you. So first of all, personally, when I got interested in intercultural communication more than 20 years ago, almost 30 years ago now, wow. And at the time, it seemed like it was going to be the thing of the 21st century, basically, because it was so important, it was so interesting, etc. And it never really happened. And now we think that it's maybe because intercultural communication has been restricted to specific courses and never really got integrated into foreign language education.
Bruno, can you play your thing? You have to press play, right?
Play?
Yeah, it's not playing.
What is not playing?
Your slide presentation.
Really?
Yeah. Lide, or whatever it says. Upper right corner.
I thought it was, I was sharing my screen. Can everybody see the slideshow? Or?
I see all of the, like you haven't started your presentation.
Ah, like this?
Yeah, the one next to it.
The next one. No, not that one, Bruno.
Sorry. Yeah.
Lead, yeah.
Yes.
There you go. Perfect.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Come in.
All right, thank you, Jerry. So, why hasn't intercultural communication reached the area of language classes? Because the way it has been tried until now was always based on concepts. That's what we are thinking now. And concepts are a bit difficult. I mean, concepts like individualism, collectivism, or identity, or perception, or high context, low context, etc. First of all, they are not that easy to understand. And also, it's difficult. They are difficult to talk about for students. So, and I've done this. I'm guilty as charged. I've done this for 10 years. I try to include as many examples, as much real life as possible, but I was talking about concepts basically. And my students were not talking a lot because it's just difficult to get students to talk about such concepts. Yep. So what Stephen and I have started doing is to do the opposite approach, which is starts from people's stories, ask some questions, make us do a survey, and ask their opinions to as many people as possible, and in particular people who have experience of living abroad, people like you and me, or Japanese people who have lived abroad. We have created a little website, the Ibunka.jp, where there are already 6 surveys. So it's possible to take the survey. Like if you click on this button, you will go to an online form, like a bit like a Google form, but similar. And you can give your own responses. We are looking at ideally this kind of responses, like this kind of volume, long form answers, a few lines long, and we don't try to get an exhaustive reply about any given topic because it's not possible. Just after a little bit thinking about this topic for a few minutes, what would you spontaneously say to someone about this topic? And we hope that the result will be like a mosaic of stories. And instead of instead of telling students it's like this, it's like that, Americans are like this, and Japanese people are more like that, and these kind of things, we'd like to let students explore, go through those responses, and make their own images, and in the process also realize that there is a variety among foreigners. All foreigners are not the same. Yeah, this is it basically, 12 topics.
So I'll be speaking about this a little bit more in the next workshop, the next presentation. These two presentations, they kind of overlap in a way, because the Ibunka survey that Bruno was just describing, the one that we've done online, the one where we're getting all of these responses, that is, in effect, that is becoming the basis of this teaching material. And if we, the slide that is actually up on the screen now, this is a way, I'll be explaining this a little bit more later on, but this is how we have students interact with this material. So we've obviously we changed the names of people who are right into our, I mean, the survey is completely, you give us your names and emails and things like that, but none of that is used in class, obviously. We give them a fake name, we keep their nationality and basically their age and where they're living, so they get an idea of the cultural context. But then, and we also edit the content a little bit for clarity. Obviously, we can't use people writing in English, and sometimes it's quite complex. The sentences are kind of long, so we need to edit this so that the students are able to understand it. But basically, the stories are all kept intact.
Yeah, we decided, actually, compared with this presentation, to change a bit the way we show this, take out the age, and insert the occupation instead. One reason was that we had too many old people. People of our age, people in their 40s and 50s. They are great respondents because they have a lot of life experience and they can articulate that experience very well. But we realized that from the point of view of a 20 years old student, it looks like their parents or even more. So we gave up showing the age of people. So this is we are working on the textbook. We are working on lessons now, and inside of the lessons themselves, we have some short responses. Then we have a section which is one step further with more responses, which is to be used or not used depending on the class and depending on the time. So now, actually, what we wanted to talk about in this first workshop is not yet what happens in the classroom. Stephen will talk about his experience in the next workshop, but rather about the topics. And I'm going to unshare my screen now briefly, if I find out how to do this. Oops, voila. And we were hoping that you would give us your impressions. So if you want to unmute your mics and if you want to put on your videos, that's great too. The idea was just to talk about those topics and see what you thought about them. And we thought we'd start with a little bit provocative opening about the mess in houses, Japanese houses. That was in the summary. So one person responded that his house was super messy, so that it was virtually impossible to invite people over, and that he had almost given up on it. And that rang a huge bell, because this is exactly what's going on in my life personally. My wife is Japanese. We live in Kyoto, in a Western style house, but it is much too cluttered to my taste, I must say. And there is this, it seems like it's a tide that never ends of stuff piling up somehow. And it's so hard to fight against this. So is that something, is it, Stephen has a similar experience? So we've been venting a lot, you know, this project has helped us to put a lot of things off our chests. But at some point we wonder if this is just happening to us and if we are strange people or if this is a common experience.
It's absolutely true for me. Yeah. I mean, we have a home that's just, we had 2 young kids, you know, and it's just got a total mess. And then after a while, we just sort of gave up. We used to have people over all the time.
Yeah.
Especially when our house was new. And then after the kids, you know, then babies, and then they're like scrawling their crayons all over the walls and the tables. And it's just laundry piling up and dishes. And it's just like, and, you know, ceiling leaking. So there's this big spot, you know, all this stuff. It's just like, I don't want to have anyone come over, you know, unless it's immediate family or like really, really close friends, like inner circle only, you know, that's kind of how it is for us.
Yeah. In the beginning, I mean, a long time ago, I tried to invite friends as well to our home, and it was such a lot of stress that I stopped. Last time I did that was like a long time ago, and I kind of virtually gave up, you know. So basically, the topic we were exploring here was mainly where do you socialize? Where do people like to socialize? And we realized that, I mean, in our cases at least, we were missing the fact of being able to invite friends in our homes. Because in France, for example, this is quite important. When you become friends with someone, at some point you say, "Hey, why don't you come over for dinner and or appetizer or whatever, something, a cup of coffee?" And not having this is something we miss actually.
But at the same time, this project, getting all of these, the Ibunka project, getting all the stories and making a mosaic and doing comparison. We're not about saying, okay, this culture does it this way, this culture does it, and this way is right or wrong. We want to show the students that, you know, there are some very deep forces that sort of affect their lives, not just as far as in Japan, but also as Japanese learners themselves going abroad or, you know, having intercultural experiences someday. So it's not just about, I mean, it is about, we got to vent a little bit on this one, and we do explore some topics that are actually, they're so everyday and they're so normal, and we've just come to see them as such a basic part of our life that you don't really think about them until you put a spotlight on them.
Yeah.
So, and at the same time, we want the students to be, the topic has to be stimulating for them. I mean, that's one of my main criteria. Anytime, like Bruno, I've taught intercultural communication for a long time and never done it to a point that I was satisfied with. And most of that was because the material that I was using, or, you know, the material that I was finding in textbooks or the syllabi was so dry, based on concepts. So, you know, when we talk about Japanese culture being different to Western culture, it's always okay. Well, let's talk about group versus individual, or let's talk about identity and things that students will maybe never get a handle on, especially in a second language. These are very, very, you know, hard to grasp things, hard to put into words for the students, you know, especially for second language learners. So, as we've said, we've taken the opposite approach. We've started with the everyday. So we have these 12 topics, things like, you know, sleeping is a topic, how, you know, attitudes towards sleep, you know, your sleeping habits, and then what that can illuminate, you know, in terms of cultural difference. What kind of things does, you know, in general, do Japanese people, what can this tell us about Japanese culture, the way that people sleep? And because the students themselves, because it is, again, so everyday for them, they've never really put it into words or never really thought about it even in Japanese, because, you know, sleep is sleep. But then when you show them, here's a list of maybe 5 or 6 people from around, this is the way that they're sleeping, this is their attitude towards sleep. That's when they start to put a little picture together in their mind. And that's really what we're trying to do. That's the idea behind putting this mosaic together.
Yeah. So the idea is everyday life things that might look a bit mundane in the beginning, but are quite deep. And what's nice about that is that we can ask students to reflect on their own lives and on their own habits, because they sleep and they have a house and they go to class, you know, and they do all these basic things. At the same time, those things can have a big impact on if they go abroad one day, for example. Like let's imagine you go abroad, a student goes abroad and gets invited to a home party, for example. Maybe that's going to be a big deal for them, you know. Should they bring a nice present, a big cake, an expensive cake, like it's done in Japan? Or should they dress up, or what's going on? Is that, what kind of situation is it? Or can they pass, because that's a lot of pressure? It would be a big loss for them to pass this opportunity, because for the people who invite them, it's a step towards friendship. But it's not one that is very natural in Japan. Same for sleep. The classic case is that students will go abroad and fall asleep in the middle of the class, you know, and the teacher will be very upset. Foreign teachers are upset in Japan, I think, most of the time when students fall asleep in our classes. But if it happens in a foreign country, not all foreign countries are the same again, but in this respect, basically same for the whole Western world. You know? The teacher is going to have a harsh reaction usually. So going from this little, they are not so little actually. They are very basic. They are very profound. These profound habits. And realize that those habits are cultural actually, and that there is other systems in this world where people have different habits. That's a big step in our opinion, and maybe we could say that the goal is to realize that if someone is behaving in a surprising way, strange way, you know, like they look stupid, or they look to have bad intentions, it might be that their cultural habit is different. So they live in a different cultural world, and in what kind of world could that behavior make sense? To have this kind of mental approach to things, this is already quite ambitious enough in our opinion, and that's something that you can hopefully. I mean, we're experimenting this approach, going from these daily life topics, and little by little, hoping that some awareness will grow of exactly this approach.
And the good thing about having this, a diversity of voices. I mean, diversity is what we're going for, but still early days, so there's still a limited number of people replying to the survey. But in the end, it will grow, and there will be voices added to it. So we will be getting a nice, rich database of information. One of the things that I think one of the strengths of having something with a lot of these little voices is the texts themselves are not so long. So for the students to be able to access them, I mean, if we're going to make them read 4 or 5 pages on intercultural communication theory, I mean, that would turn them off. But the fact that it can be read in a few moments, and it's once we've edited the language to their level, it's quite accessible for the students, and they're able to put these stories together in their mind, as we were saying. So, yeah, it's the length of it is. We found that we were trying for. At the start, we were trying for a lot of detail, so we were asking a lot more questions than we should have. We created a survey. When we made the survey, we had 7 questions. We were thinking maybe 7 questions on each topic, and that would cover this aspect of it and that aspect of it, and, you know, shine a light on this as well. But in the end, we realized that, you know, simple is best, and we went after getting these stories, which, you know, they were very rich and very interesting, and they showed a lot of good, you know, cultural topics to the students, but it was just too complex, because culture itself is very, very complex. And if we peek into that, you know, the treasure box of all this stuff, there's too much to look at. So we have to do it one at a time and really narrow the focus on. So for sleep, we talked about, we narrowed it down to a question like, do you think it's important to manage your sleep? And what does that mean? It just means to get enough sleep every night and to have a set wake up, sleeping time, wake up time. And we found that just with that one question, we had enough almost to create a little mosaic, and that was enough for the students to go on to start comparing their reality and their lifestyle with those of other cultures.
Yeah. In the sleep, there was also the question about co-sleeping with children.
Right, that was another little extra one. But,
is it normal to sleep with that the parents sleep with the children sleep with their parents or not, which is very common in Japan? So maybe we'd like to ask your little feedback on the topics we have chosen. But first of all, we've already mentioned the topic of sleep and the topic of inviting guests to your home, and therefore keeping the home tidy, more or less. Do you have any? Does anybody have any comments on those two?
Bruno, if it's okay, this is Kristen.
Sure. Yeah. Hi.
Hi, what you're talking about is exactly what I've been trying to teach my students for the past 10 years at my high school.
Yeah.
It's exactly what I'm trying to do. And because there is nothing, it has been a horrific challenge to not make it this collegiate, cultural, intense studying for high school kids. So when you mention topics like sleep and inviting people to your friend's house, I think that's a good start. But I think for high school kids, especially in my case, things like how to, like, apologizing or making excuses, or like not misunderstandings, but specifically I can think of like apologizing or excuses, places where kids often run into those problems on a homestay basis. For example, my students in that case. Or maybe the misunderstandings of what is funny. That may be a huge topic, I fear, but my students think it's great to be like over the top and loud and obnoxious, and in every culture that's not the case.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that tends to run into some misunderstandings and cultural conflicts, I would say.
Right. Hey, Kristen, don't you want to switch on your camera?
I'm sorry, I thought it was on. Okay, hang on. Okay, let me try again. Is that it?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, that helps. Yeah. It's much easier to. Yeah. Thank you. That's great indeed. Yeah, humor is so cultural. I don't want to use derogatory terms. You know, I don't want to give the impression that I don't like Japanese culture and I'm against Japan, etc., which is not the case. I've chosen this country. I'm married to a Japanese woman, etc., etc. But when I see a Japanese series, I cringe very often because it seems so overplayed. You know, like all the expressions and it's like. But it refers to like maybe acting when no acting with masks, you know, it's more like the persona rather than the person.
Mm-hmm.
it's a different way of acting and stuff. I think humor is a tricky one to approach, because how to describe that is very, very difficult. Huh? Actually, we found that there are two types of topics that we could cover. One type of topics is like habits, like sleeping, or inviting guests, or how to approach club life, or looking for a job, on these kind of things. And the other one is communication styles. So apologizing, making excuses is extremely interesting indeed. I've noticed myself, I remember clearly that example of such a long time ago, a student not handing me her report when it was due. And I asked, I was upset, I said, why? And she said, I didn't have time, or I couldn't, or something like this. I'm sorry. I was so upset because I thought she was making fun of me, really. And it's long time later I really understood that in Japan, it's if you give the reason for something like that, it's almost like you're trying to show that you're not responsible. You're making an excuse, Oh, I couldn't do it because no. It sounds like an excuse in Japan. In Japan, people just take responsibility. I couldn't do it. I'm sorry. Like that, Whereas in France, you have to say the reason. If you don't say the reason, why you were not able to do it on time, because your brother got sick or whatever, something happened, then the person will not be satisfied. So it's quite interesting, all these things. It's difficult. We've already covered one of those type of topics, which is how to ask for a favor, which is something that we discovered in a great book that compares American and French cultures, written by Raymond Carroll. It's French-American Hidden Differences, or something like this. And she says that usually French people, when they want a favor from a friend, they will usually hint at their problem. They will mention their problem, and the friend will suggest some help. And usually the classical thing is like that. Yeah? The friend will suggest some help. Can I help you doing that? And then the person will say, oh, no, it's too much trouble, isn't it? It's okay. Yeah, no, it's fine. Oh, really? Okay, thank you so much.
The refusal process, yeah.
That would be a typical. I mean, she's contrasting Americans and French people who have hugely different cultures. And Americans don't understand that. They think it's a bit hypocritical. Like hiding, like devious or something like this. And it seems the American proper way is to, when you have a friend, you should ask openly. Can you help me do that? And the friend can say yes or can say no, no hard feelings. So when these two approaches clash, actually Americans and French get huge culture shocks. And it's quite interesting to show Japanese students that Westerners among themselves can have big cultural differences and culture shocks. So this is the first of those communication style topics we have already started covering. If you go to our little website, there is this survey, number 4, something like this. And you've got the responses of quite a number of people: Americans, French, Japanese, Hungarian, etc. And we had other ideas. Let me share my screen again.
So just putting a question out there, do any of these really strike a chord with any of you, or are there any that perhaps you think maybe wouldn't work well? I mean, we've done the ones out of this that we've already put out as surveys and actually started using as class material are at the clubhouse, in a shop, inviting people to your home, in the classroom, sleep, and asking a favor. The other ones haven't been, they're sort of uncharted territory yet. But if there's anything like humor, for example, as Kirsten was saying, I think it's fascinating too. It's a great topic, and if there was a way that we were able to, one, get some good responses, and then two, make that into and put that into sort of a class style or a class format that students would get pretty well. It's a very tricky though. I think I'd like to give it a try, but something like we have to make a decision about some of them. It's better to show them these cultural concepts and realities through a situation. Like we have to look at in the home or in a shop, or so for example, in a shop we talk about vertical and horizontal relationships, where this is something I'm very interested in, where in Japan, the customer is so much usually so much higher than the staff, and the language and the behavior reflects that very, very, openly. Whereas in my home culture of Australia, I remember going back, every time I go back, I'm shocked that shop staff is, hey, just treat me like an old friend, which is, it's neither one is good or bad. It's just the way that, our values and attitudes are reflected in this behavior. But for Japanese students and a lot of people that I've taken surveys of Japanese people who've traveled abroad, and they come back saying, oh, the shop staff are so rude, when in fact, when an Australian, the local people think, oh, that shop has great service, where it's, what is great service? What is friendliness? What is politeness? These things, you can't explain them in one page of text. You have to, like we're trying to do, paint a picture with as many different examples as possible. So if anyone has some topics that they've either used in class or would like to use in class, now's your chance.
How about something connected to homestay or travel abroad? Like I would imagine I would use this textbook in a class with students who are interested to travel abroad and study abroad. We're actually going to be doing that. This is just off the top of my head. Is there something that could be connected to, like, dealing with that, or in another direction? This also just came to me, like being in a relationship with someone from a different culture. I don't know.
This is the current topic. The current survey is about couple relationships and gender. And you're all welcome to take the survey. You might have some interesting stories about the homestay. One part of the topic of in the house was the fact of giving a tour to guests or not giving a tour. Americans, and it seems Australians as well, give a tour of their house. This is the bathroom, this is the toilet, this is everything. And French people don't do that at all. You don't give a tour of your house because people don't go into bedrooms. So in this respect, I think Japan, if we take broad strokes again, I don't want to make it too simple, but Japanese culture is more closer to French culture in that way. Which is in Japan, when you very rarely go into someone's house in Japan, but when you do, you go only to a very specific number of rooms, like the living room, for example, and you have yourself as the guest the responsibility of knowing where you can and where you cannot go. Whereas it seems in the States, for example, give a tour, and everything is open for negotiation. Is that okay? Yes, no. Help yourself. The help yourself culture. That's a big shock for students who go abroad. Like one of your students,
Exactly.
Stephen.
We had Jerry, the study abroad, the homestay thing, it actually plays out in a lot of these little situations, communication styles.
Yeah.
One about that Bruno was just mentioning about the help yourself culture. So if for example, in Australia or in America, I've taken students for the homestays, and then I'd get a call from the homestay parents a few days in saying, the student hasn't eaten anything, or the student hasn't even used the bathroom, gone and had a shower yet. I don't know if are they okay. And then when you see both sides of the story, the host parents have given them the tour of the house, and they've said, help yourself, here's the bathroom, you're responsible for taking a bath, and doing all of this. And if you're hungry, you have to go to the fridge and you help yourself to the food in the fridge, you make your own lunch. And that is considered, that's the style of, you're part of the family, my home is your home, this is how it works here. But even though a Japanese a student during a homestay over there is told all of this, and even if they know they're supposed to do that, there's something very deep inside them that, as a guest,
Sure.
I'm not supposed to cross these boundaries. So I've had students who have gone 4 or 5 days without, having lunch, and they've been asking people for food, or even the worst case scenario was one guy didn't have a shower for a few days, and that was just. The whole thing was, that was it was an extreme example, but he was just thinking, maybe I shouldn't be going into this family's, private bathroom. He didn't, but he was nervous to start with, but, just these little cultural differences were enough to, have a very, so it has a profound effect on his experience there. So
that's an interesting story, Stephen. Do you guys have any idea of using like a situation gone awry as a learning opportunity? Because what you just said would be very instructive, right? I don't know, maybe not just of an activity, but maybe in the way you go about presenting the different topics, like starting from a disaster or and then analyzing what went wrong or what happened. What was this person thinking? What was that person thinking? I don't know, that just because what you were just talking was very interesting in that way. Insightful.
Stephen will talk about class activities in the next workshop, but
all right,
it's a bit difficult. We are experimenting with some sections called culture shock, in which 2 people give their point of view, their different point of view, how they have been seeing things. But it's very tricky, because there is always the danger of people feeling that their culture is being criticized, or we think that one is superior to the other, or it's not easy. But
all right.
In the end, culture is so complex, so it's really hard. And one way of seeing this is that we can provide a basic foundation, which is kind of simple in a way, and kind of basic, and let teachers build on that according to the special needs of their students, or their own experiences and their own philosophies.
Okay.
Only.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Mark, you haven't spoken yet, so please go ahead.
It was very helpful to me to hear you say that the problem with intercultural communication in a course is that it's been presented through concepts, and maybe I hadn't been able to articulate that, but that's been what I've tried to do. So we'll have a unit on identity, or identity will be the topic. And then you think, well, I need to give them something to read about identity, so they'll have a vocabulary to talk about identity. But it strikes me that with this, you could say something like, how do you talk about X? How do you talk about sleep? And then you have sleep, and you have talk, you have language. So you ask a student whose native tongue is Japanese to talk in English with other Japanese students how they talk about sleep. And you have this problem right away that my students anyway at Narajoshita, they think, well, I know what you're going to say, and you know what I'm going to say, because we're all Japanese, and so we're going to say the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so they don't have anything to talk about.
Mm.
But if you ask, well, what do you talk about? In effect, you're asking, what do you notice about sleep in your own experience?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What do you pay attention to? What do you think about?
Mm.
Because ultimately, it seems you are asking them to arrive at concepts or categories
Yeah, yeah.
instead of to start with them.
Yeah,
So
yeah, exactly,
it's-
exactly.
So I think that's a way to, the way to go.
Mm.
But I've had a few successful classes talking about hair and makeup
Oh, yeah?
and clothing and
Mm.
exercise and diet and
Ah,
entertainment.
yeah.
So you end up getting the standard
Mm.
run of topics, but maybe we just need to defamiliarize those topics,
Yeah.
like hobbies,
Mm.
where you get, let's talk about hobbies.
Mm.
And so some students says, as I've heard them say, one of my hobbies is sleep.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And you say, well, no, I've said, no American student, I'm sure, would ever say that their hobby was sleeping.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So what is a hobby?
Mm.
And then you start getting
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
these larger questions.
Mm.
But the larger questions would just be pretexts for keeping a conversation going,
Mm.
so that you're always making students aware that this is a English language class and they're practicing talking
Mm.
in English about things that they may not have ever talked about
Yeah.
in Japanese.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But indeed, it helps if those things are not so abstract and they are
Yeah.
grounded in reality.
Yeah.
Much easier to.
And with their phones there, you can say, go ahead and call up that image, or show something that you use, or, and so they start looking at something or listening to something.
Mm.
And the ultimate aim, it seems to me, in a conversation class, instead of teaching students about culture, would be to give what Jerry was calling alpha plus responses, just
Yeah.
to talk more
Mm.
and draw out their passive English vocabulary.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
So I think some of the standard topics that textbooks touch on, like hobbies or what did you do yesterday,
Mm.
if you drill down into those,
Mm.
you can get all the material
Yeah.
that you need.
Yeah.
I mean, students in our CVs, our resumes,
Yeah.
we're born and then we graduate from college, right?
Mm.
So you just skip 20 years.
Mm.
Sometimes people wake up and then they're at the university.
Mm.
But what did you do? What do you actually do when you wake up? Do you get up? And then you can talk about the difference between waking up and getting up in English.
Mm.
I woke up, but I lay in bed for an hour, or I usually do that, and then I look at my phone. And then you start to talk about individual differences, and students can be very concrete with each other about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I don't have any
Thank you, Mark.
sharing things.
Hobbies is a great one, and I would like to find the way, because even in our conversation classes and in conversations in class, there's about, what are your hobbies? And then there's always the topic of, I sleep, or I go shopping, or things that are not classified, we don't think of them as hobbies. So I do, even with very low level classes, I do put the question out, what is a hobby? And what's the definition? It's something that you do. It's something to do to better yourself, or something you work at, or something you devote time to. And then in that sense, the students are like, well, I devote time to sleep, so it's a hobby. It's what I do when I'm not at school, or I'm not, in my club. So again, it goes back to these very fundamental, daily life, how they spend their time and what they do. So.
Kristen, you wanted to say something? After I think we'll break at 3:45. Just take a little break before the final workshop. We need, among other things, to order some pizza for our little get together. We are 4 people in this room now, so. But yeah, go ahead, Kristen.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't catch the gentleman's name who was speaking a moment ago. Mark it is?
Mark, yes.
Okay, Mark had he brought up some other great ideas about things for the book, fashion styles and exercise and entertainment and such like that, which I think starting from that concept of everyday life with the kids and showing those differences around the world and how everyone else does it differently, I think is a great start as well. As for other topics, with all you guys talking, one thing that always comes up is time.
Yeah.
And how people see time, being late, being on time, making appointments, keeping appointments, canceling, all that stuff around time seems to be a huge difference across the cultures. And it is something my students consistently have problems with, no matter how much I try to explain the cultural differences. If you're in Japan, you're late. Yeah. And I know that concept. If you're late, you're still on time. I grew up with, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. And if you're late, you're left. And so I'm very strict with my kids on time because I'm like, well, the next place you're going to go, which they go abroad to New Zealand, I'm like, they hold the time in class. They protect, they're very much on time in class. I said, but outside of the school, they're very laxed in their time. So the buses, unlike Japan, will come late or come early and you may miss a bus. Whereas in Japan, if you're there, the bus comes pretty much on time every time. Same with trains, unless something unusual happens. And so my kids run into conflicts with those kind of things around time. And coming to walking into the class as the chime rings is not a problem here. But when they go abroad, they get scolded at many a times. And so they're like, well, wait a minute, the chime's still ringing. I'm safe, right? And I was like, well, no, that we start the class here at that time, not that you come at that time. So I think anything around time is a really good thing as far as the topic.
Yeah, I agree. That's an excellent idea. Yeah.
And maybe just before, Kana, you wanted to say something?
There may not be time for my question, but it was more of a question asking, I looked through your survey just now just to see the general categories, and I wanted to ask how you boiled it down to those categories. So what was the organizing, and was there some framework that you drew upon, or were those the questions that most interested you?
It's still in progress, so it's not definitive, but
okay.
It was areas of life that are fundamental and that we feel also we can establish some kind of continuum on. So that's why, for example, the humor topic is a bit difficult in my opinion, because how can we say a continuum? I mean, if we get a good suggestion, we're open to it. But like, for example, the topic of clubs, club life in Japan, some club members spend a long time in their clubs every week, like 20 hours a week, and every Sunday, every weekend, etc. That's like a give your all kind of approach. And in many Western countries, it would be more like, okay, I give this much, and 1 hour, 2 hours a week, or it's more like decide, and it's connected with the sleep thing actually. In Japan, you work until you fall asleep on your desk or anywhere. And in the West, in many Western countries, you have to manage yourself. You judge how much you want to give. So we can find a little continuum. So it's difficult to say exactly, but topics that are important, central to life, that might bring about a culture shock when someone goes abroad, And also that can be, we can find some kind of continuum to say like, hey, look, there are two poles of this. People can be more or less along a continuum, more or less in this direction or that one. And it must be a topic that students can relate to. So it's all, we experiment and in this way, trying to incorporate all these factors.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And just one kind of impression that I had. So when you mentioned the topic of shops, and I think connected to that, you spoke about how we speak to shopkeepers, but also how they addressed us in this issue of, what kind of language do we use when we interact with somebody for the first time? And I felt that that could be applicable in a much larger sense, just basically how do we interact with people that we meet for the first time? I think for me, I show interest by asking many questions, but for some people, maybe many Japanese, it could be a bit intimidating to be asked many questions. So that's just something I thought about.
Absolutely, absolutely. And even before meeting someone for the first time, there are people that we cross in the street, for example, or in public spaces, and we don't actually meet. And how do we respond to them? That's also very cultural. Like Americans will make some kind of contact by eyes or smile or hi or something like this. And for example, French people ignore strangers, basically. Same as they are more like Japanese people in that respect. It's like if you exchange looks or smile with a stranger, it's like, whoa, something is going on. It's not natural. So. Even that very outside level of encounter, the behaviors are very cultural as well. Yeah, we'll send a survey on this topic in not too long.
That one's coming soon, but I think this is going to continue in the next workshop as well.
Sure.
These sort of are all connected. I'm going to talk in, after a little break, say 10 minutes now.
Yes.
We'll come back and I'm going to discuss, show some of the things we've been doing in trying to transfer these, these cultural stories and this mosaic into the classroom. So
Right.
we can touch on this again.
Yeah.